When Steven signed the papers on the 40-acre place outside Emporia, Kansas, he kept his palms flat on the title, breathing like a man who'd made it across a river with his boots still on. He was 58 then, 2 years out of the army, after a career mostly spent fixing what other folks broke: radios in Bosnia, generators in Afghanistan, people when he could. The VA check was modest. The savings were smaller than he wanted to admit. But the land felt honest. Pasture on the south side, a windbreak of cottonwoods along a creek that only ran brown after thunderstorms, and a tired pole barn with a roof that would whistle in March. He and Ruth named it the place as if giving it a proper name would tempt fate. They didn't need much else. Ruth taught part-time at the library in town, cataloging donated paperbacks and shushing teenagers with a look that could pin a tomcat. Steven mended fence, took odd jobs, raised layer hens, and leased 10 acres to a neighbor for alfalfa. It wasn't a TV farm. It was work. It was theirs. Life rolled along on its small rails until Ruth's cough stopped being a cough. The hospital in Topeka used words that make men stare at carpets. By the time the cottonwoods leafed out, Steven slept in a recliner next to her hospice bed and learned the weight of silence. The morning she passed, the dog wouldn't come into the bedroom. Steven held her hand and felt the tremor go out of it. He said, "All clear, Ruth," because that was the radio check he'd used in a dozen dusty tents. He meant it 2 ways. After the funeral, people came with casseroles and clumsy kindness. His older boy, Caleb, stood near the back of the church with a new haircut and a wife on his arm, a pretty sharp-cheeked woman named Amber, who had a way of smiling without softening. They lived up in Kansas City, he said, sales job for him, something in wellness coaching for her. Rent was nuts, gas too. They hugged, promised to visit soon, and disappeared in a trail of brake dust. Soon didn't come until Christmas, then March, then August, when the air felt like a damp towel and Steven's left knee started catching on stairs. Caleb called and said they were moving in for a while, just until they got squared away. "You shouldn't be out there alone, Dad," he said. "We can help." The way he said help made Steven think of a man steadying a table he planned to carry out of the room. They arrived with a U-Haul and a plan. The spare bedroom got painted a cool gray. The second spare became an office for Amber's clients. She hung a ring light over Ruth's old sewing table. A small chalkboard went by the fridge monthly budget. Steven's name landed on half the lines: utilities, groceries, shared expenses. He didn't make a fuss. That wasn't his way. He'd been told for so many years to drive on that stopping felt unpatriotic. At first there were good hours. Coffee on the porch steps, watching mist lift off the grass. Caleb helped replace a broken gate hinge, and they laughed when the dog stole the socket wrench. Amber made a kale salad Steven ate like medicine. "You'll feel great," she said, tapping his chest with a manicured finger. He didn't feel great. He felt like a man chewing lawn clippings. The slippage started small. A padlock on the old gun cabinet for safety. A comment about fall hazards when Steven stacked feed bags in the mudroom. The keys to the pickup went missing and reappeared on a hook by the door. "Let's keep things where everyone can find them," Amber said, voice light as packing peanuts. Steven wrote a note to himself and tucked it in his wallet. "This is your house." Sundays, Amber streamed a preacher with perfect teeth who talked about abundance. The man's backdrop was a house with glass railings. Steven sat at the edge of the couch and thought of the chaplain in Coast, who'd prayed with his sleeves rolled up, dust on his boots, and a chapstick line in his pocket. Abundance back then meant nobody got hit that night. One afternoon in late October, Steven climbed the ladder in the barn to move a box of Christmas lights from the loft. He had Ruth's voice in his head, ask for help. Steve, but the boy was off somewhere and Amber was talking to a client through headphones. The ladder shifted. Steven grabbed a rafter held for a heartbeat and dropped. It wasn't far. It was far enough. He landed hard on his backside. Something in his hip zinged and then burned. He sat on the packed dirt and watched dust float between him and the rafters like snow that didn't know where it was headed. He got himself up. He could. He did. He walked to the house, slow, one hand on the wall, sweat cold and mean across his hairline. Amber met him in the kitchen with a look that said both inconvenience and opportunity. "Oh no," she said, high and bright. "We really need to rethink this whole place if you're going to insist on doing ladders." "I'll be all right," Steven said. "Will you?" she said, voice soft now, sympathetic, just like the telemarketers who used to call the fob and pitch credit cards to kids who'd never bought a couch. At night, the pain hummed behind his hip like a refrigerator. The VA clinic scheduled him for imaging the following week. He took his pills and used the cane Caleb had found at a thrift store. The dog slept at the foot of the bed and flinched when Steven did. A cold snap hauled November into the yard. The cottonwoods went bare overnight. The wind came through bone. Steven woke early the day the first dusting of snow came, made it down the hall with care, and started his slow trip down the stairs from the bedroom he'd kept because it still smelled faintly like Ruth's lotion when the heat kicked on. Halfway down, he stopped. Amber was at the bottom with a tray, a steaming bowl of something healthy, 2 thick slices of bread, a mug. She looked up, saw him hesitate, and stepped left. He stepped right. The old patch of runner he'd never replaced bunched under his heel. He pitched forward, flailing for the rail. Amber lunged to catch the tray. The bowl leaped, turned, and let go of itself. A ribbon of hot soup snapped like a flag and came down on Steven's sweatshirt. The shock stole his breath. The tray hit the stair and clattered into hymn book cacophony. Steven Amber yelped, but not the way people do when they're scared exactly. More like when they drop a phone. Doors open fast when they're already cracked. Caleb came out of the bedroom they'd taken over, hair up like a startled rooster. He saw his father hunkered halfway down the stairs, soup sliding off the hem of a sweatshirt onto the treads, and something in his face hardened like water in a pan. "Dad," he said loud, as if volume could make the moment behave, "you need to sit. You can't keep roaming around. If you can walk, go out to the field and walk there." The words landed like crows. Out to the field. Steven knew what field meant in a country where family plots still dotted back fences. A man says field when he won't say graveyard. Amber put a hand on Caleb's arm, but she didn't look at Steven. She looked at the mess, the stairs, her sock. "Let me clean this up," she said, already on her knees with a dish towel. Steven sat still and let the heat of the soup fade. He thought of 100 nights in 1,000-yard darkness, where men he'd known by last name only spoke soft and decent to each other over busted knuckles and stale MRE crackers. He thought of Ruth handing him a mug of chicken broth when he had the flu, and the way she'd tilt her head waiting to laugh because she always let him go first. He stood. He took the rail. He stepped around the towel and down into the kitchen where his son stood in doorway, light shoulders, squared as if he were bracing for a door to blow in. Steven kept his voice even. "I hear you, Caleb," he said. Caleb blinked, surprised at the calm. "Good," he said, easing back. Steven nodded as if agreeing to take a hill he'd already mapped from 3 angles. "I hear you just fine." He went to the sink, rinsed his sleeves, and changed without hurry. When he came back, the bowl sat on the table with a new ladle of soup cooling inside it. Amber poured coffee like a hostess in a commercial. Steven sat, took a sip, and tasted ginger. He swallowed and set the cup down. In his head, a switch clicked. Men who spend a lifetime taking orders learn the weight of the moment you give one to yourself. The VA X-ray said degenerative changes, and the physician's assistant used the kind of voice that lets a man keep his pride while pointing at the truth. "We'll get you some PT," she said. "Try a different anti-inflammatory. Use the cane. No ladders." She smiled. "You've already done your share of climbing, Mr. Hale." Hale was Steven's last name. Most folks used his first. He liked the way she said it, respect baked in, not frosted on. Back at the house, Amber taped a full risk checklist on the fridge she'd printed from some blog. bath mat with suction cups, nightlight in the hall. And we need to talk about long-term options, she added, stirring something green in a blender, just to get ahead of this. Such as Steven asked. Assisted living, she said, saying it soft like a nurse on a soap opera. Only if it becomes necessary. We're not there. She flicked her eyes at the cane yet. Caleb came home late with the kind of tired that comes from screens, not shovels. He dropped a kiss on Amber's head, grabbed a beer, and told Steven about a podcast he'd been listening to on reducing stress by eliminating friction. Steven looked at the cane and thought that some friction keeps a man upright. They started doing things for him. They took over the bills. Streamline it, Dad. They optimized the pantry, moved the coffee filters to a drawer he'd never used. They suggested replacing his recliner with a firmer posture chair. Amber brought home brochures from 2 places north of town, Prairie Crest and Brookside. Photos of laughing silver-haired people tossing beanbags indoors. Steven took the brochures to the barn and set them under the water-stained corner of a plywood shelf so it wouldn't wobble. At night he called his younger boy Matthew, who worked fiber optic line down in Oklahoma. "Come up," Steven said, "just to visit." "Can't yet," Matthew said, apologetic. "We're running behind Dad." Storm blew out a stretch. "I'll make it up after Christmas, I promise." "You be careful up there," Steven said, "meaning on the lifts and also in the world at large?" He hung up and looked at Ruth's photo on the mantel. Her eyes said, "Now what?" On a Tuesday, Caleb drove Steven to PT. The therapist was a woman in her 50s with strong hands and a sunflower state tattoo on her wrist. She talked about muscles and balance, asked plain questions, and expected plain answers. "You've fallen," before she asked. "Twice," Steven said. "Barn ladder and stairs." "Who's at home with you?" she asked. "My son and his wife," Steven said, keeping his face neutral. "Okay," she said. "Homework, you do the exercises, you use the cane, and you remember this falling is data, not destiny." On the way home, Caleb drove one-handed, tapping the wheel with his fingers. "Dad," he said like he'd practiced in the driveway, "it's time we talk about what happens if this gets worse. Amber and I can't be on call forever. It's not sustainable, you know." "I know about sustainable," Steven said mildly. "I kept a generator running for 7 months with chewing gum and cussing." Caleb exhaled through his nose. "It's not just you," he said. "It's this whole situation. House isn't set up for a fall. The stairs." "I could move my bed downstairs," Steven offered. "That's not the point," Caleb said. "The point is structure." He liked that word. It made him sound managerial. Back at the house, Amber had moved the recliner. "Better flow," she said. The dog looked confused. That night, the phone rang. It was Earl from the VFW, voice like gravel poured out of a coffee can. "Haven't seen you in a bit, Hale," he said. "We're short a hand for Friday's fish fry. You alive?" "Alive," Steven said. "I'll be there. Don't make me run the fryer." "You'll pour lemonade and look honest," Earl said. "It sells tickets." At the post, old men with ball caps and younger ones with scars behind their ears lined up for plates. Steven stood behind a folding table and filled foam cups. He made small talk weather chiefs, the kind of gossip that comes from knowing the mechanic's cousin. When the rush eased, Earl leaned against the wall. "You okay out there?" Earl asked. He meant the farm, but he also meant the long road between a man's pride and his future. "Working on my gate," Steven said, "and my plan." "Get it on paper," Earl said. "Paper is armor." After cleanup, a woman in a navy blazer with a county seal stitched above the pocket introduced herself as Maria Sanchez, attorney. "I come around once a month and answer questions," she said. "Earl says you're stubborn and careful in equal measure. That's a draft horse combination." "I want to keep living at my place," Steven said without preface. "I want to do it on my terms, and I want to make sure nobody parks me somewhere I don't choose." She didn't blink. "Then you need a fresh will," she said, counting off on her fingers a revocable living trust with the house and land in it. powers of attorney you actually trust, and a transfer on death deed if you want to keep things simple. Also consider a life estate if you plan to sell part of the property, but reserve your right to live there. She paused. And you need to decide what you really want to happen to the dirt. The dirt, Steven smiled. Land is people, she said. Some folks don't understand that until they see a for sale sign in the family yard. Steven thought of Caleb's face at the stairs. He thought of Matthew's voice on the phone. He thought of Ruth's hand on his arm the day they signed for the farm. I want the land to keep being useful, he said. To teach, to feed, to have a dog run along the fence and scare the quail. We can do that, Maria said. There are conservation easements, ag ed programs, veteran farmer co-ops. We can carve pieces if you wish. Pieces, he said, rolling the word like a nut between his teeth. Maybe one piece for a man who needs to learn what a day's labor feels like. Maria's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Come by my office Monday, she said. Bring your current documents. We'll make new armor. When Steven got home, the kitchen smelled like lavender cleaner. The chalkboard had a fresh list: private caregiver cost, Brookside tour Thursday 10 a.m., sell old pickup. Steven erased the last line with his sleeve and wrote, Fish fry Friday, 312 raised. He stood back and looked at it until the silence in the house changed shape. In the doorway, Amber folded her arms. We're trying to help you, she said. I know, Steven said, and I'm grateful for gravy when it's gravy. She frowned. I don't understand what that means. It means I know the difference between help and a hand on my back, he said gently. I feel both. The next morning he took a slow walk along the fence line with the cane breath fogging the air. At the far corner where the cottonwoods rattled like somebody shaking a jar of dry beans, he stopped and put his palm on the rough bark. All clear, he said to nobody and to Ruth. Then he headed back to write things on paper. Maria's office sat over a storefront on Commercial Street with a view of the courthouse clock. Inside her desk was neat in the way of people who know where to find every mess. She spread Steven's old papers out like a mechanic lays parts on a clean cloth. Outdated, she said of the will. No trust, no medical directive. Powers of attorney appointing Ruth, which she let the sentence end itself. Steven nodded once. Here's the plan, Maria said, sliding him a typed sheet. We create the Hale Living Trust. You as trustee keep control while you're alive and competent. The trust will own the farm, the house, the barn, the accounts. She glanced at his list and the pickup you don't want to sell. Correct, Steven said. We add a life estate deed for the farmhouse if we decide to carve the acreage. That keeps you in your home as long as you choose. You appoint me or Earl as your medical POA your call, and we name a successor trustee who actually has your interests at heart. Earl won't do a lick of paperwork, Steven said. He'll tell me that to my face. Then pick someone who will, she said, pen poised. Matthew, Steven said, if he'll take it. Good, she said. Now the land. You said pieces. How many? 3, Steven said. He'd thought all weekend measuring by footsteps and memory. First piece 30 acres, the heart of it placed under a conservation easement and leased long-term to the ag program at Flint Hills Technical College. Let 'em run a pasture rotation and teach kids how to mend a fence right. Second piece, the farmhouse and 2 acres a life estate for me, remainder to the trust to be handled later. Third piece, 1 acre on the north side with the old tool shed. I want it permitted and finished out, legal insulation, plumbing, the works. A small, decent house. For whom Maria asked, though she knew. For a man who needs to live small enough to hear his own thoughts, Steven said. We'll deed it to him with covenants. No second mortgage, no sale for 5 years. If he walks away, it reverts to the trust. You're not trying to be cruel, Maria said, searching his face. I'm trying to be clear, he said. Clarity is a form of kindness a lot of folks avoid. And Caleb, she asked. He'll be offered that 1 acre and the small house, Steven said, along with seed money enough to plant a real garden, and maybe buy a used tiller. He can learn to grow what he eats, learn to fix a leaky trap without calling a man. And Amber Maria asked. She's married to my son Steven said. My business with her ends at my fence line. Maria nodded. We'll need contractors for the shed conversion, permits, a survey to split lots. The easement paperwork can take a month, the lease with the college longer. I've still got friends, Steven said, and a little credit at the lumberyard. They worked until lunch. Maria read clauses aloud in plain English the way a good NCO explains a map. With this, she said, tapping the medical directive, nobody moves you anywhere you don't consent to short of emergency. With this, she tapped the trust, nobody pushes you with money. And with this, the deed draft, you keep sleeping under your roof on your terms. Steven signed, initialed, and signed again. His hand cramped. He stretched it out and felt for the first time in a while the peculiar lightness that comes from anchoring something heavy. On the way home, he stopped at the lumberyard. The owner, a woman named Darla who'd gone to church with Ruth, gave him a discount he didn't ask for. I heard about your fall, she said. That ladder's seen the last of you. I'll let a younger fool borrow it, he said. Lord knows we got plenty of those, she said, ringing him up. You need help with the shed you call my nephew. He swings a hammer better than he does a bat. Back at the farm, Steven told Caleb he'd be in the north lot cleaning up the old shed. Caleb frowned. Why, he asked. Because a thing left to rot teaches the wrong lesson, Steven said. He and Darla's nephew Colt pulled down the bad boards framed in a small bedroom, a tight kitchen, a square shower you could actually turn in. Steven held the chalk line and kept his mouth shut, except when the boy asked. He answered the questions that cost nothing and kept the ones that would make him sound like a man giving a sermon to his own son. Amber's clients came and went, parked half on the grass. Caleb posted before and after photos of the living room on social like he'd conquered a country. Steven posted nothing. He stacked scrap wood behind the barn and slept hard. On a Thursday, Maria called. Survey's done, easement draft ready. The college is excited they'll send a dean to meet you. Also, the permits on the shed conversion were approved. Nice drawings, by the way. I've drawn rooms on mess hall napkins, Steven said. Easier on graph paper. Last thing Maria said, you're going to tell them. Soon, he said, on a day when the weather tells the truth. That Sunday, the sky turned that plain, hard blue Kansas gets in late winter. You can see a long way under that kind of blue. Steven made coffee, fried 2 eggs, and ate at the table. Amber came in with a smile cranked up past natural. Good morning, she said. We scheduled tours Brookside Thursday, Prairie Crest Friday. I think you'll really like the community rooms. I won't be going, Steven said. He kept his voice soft but put weight in it like setting a post straight. And you won't schedule anything else for me. Caleb walked in, then catching just enough of the words to bristle. We're trying to keep you safe, he said, the groove worn deep. I know, Steven said, but you don't get to choose how I live. You can't even get down the stairs without Caleb started. Steven put his palm up. Do not finish that sentence. The room held its breath. Somewhere outside a crow laughed. Sit, Steven said finally, and waited until they did. This is your notice, not an argument, not a debate. I've made arrangements. You'll hear them when the right people are in the room. What people? Amber asked. The ones who understand land and law and work, Steven said. Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Supper will be chilly. If you show up hungry, you'll leave fed. If you show up to fight, you'll leave full of something else. Is this about the shed? Caleb demanded. You've been out there like a raccoon. What is that, some tiny house experiment? Something like that, Steven said. We'll talk Wednesday. He stood. The dog stood with him. He rinsed his plate. He went out into the clear, cold air that smells like iron and memory and walked to the north lot to check the cork. Men who've lived by orders know how to build a day out of small tasks while the big thing waits. By 5:30 on Wednesday, the big pot steamed on the stove and cornbread cooled in a cast-iron skillet Ruth had seasoned for 20 years. Steven set 4 bowls on the table. At 5:50, Earl came in with a store pie and a handshake that cracked knuckles. At 5:55, Maria knocked and waved away the dog with a laugh. At 5:59, a man in boots and a clean Carhartt jacket stepped in behind them and introduced himself as Dean Parker from Flint Hills Technical College. "Appreciate the chili," he said, eyes already tracking the house like a builder. Caleb and Amber arrived on the stroke of 6, their faces set like plates. Amber took in Maria's blazer, the dean's hands, and Earl's hat, and decided to smile at none of them. Steven ladled chili and said grace the way he always had, brief, sincere, no poetry. They ate, the air loosened. Earl told a story about a long-ago fishing trip and left the funny part out until the end. Dean asked one question about the well, and you could feel him storing the answer in a labeled drawer. Amber ate 2 bites and set her spoon down, careful not to clink. When the bowls sat empty and the coffee steamed, Steven rested his hands flat on the table. "All right," he said. "Here it is." He looked at Caleb first. "This land has kept me alive," he said. "Not with money, God knows there isn't much, but with work I could see. I will not be leaving it until I choose to. That's settled in writing." He nodded at Maria, who slid a folder halfway across the table and stopped. "Second," he said, "the farm, 30 acres of it, will be placed under a conservation easement and leased to the ag program at Flint Hills Tech for a fair rate. Dean here will see to it students learn to mend fences, rotate pasture, and treat a gate like a handshake. The lease money will keep the lights on here and cover what the VA doesn't." Dean inclined his head. "We'll be good stewards, Mr. Hale." Third, Steven went on this house, and the 2 acres under it are in my trust with a life estate. That means I live here as long as I live here. After that, the trustee decides. The trustee is your brother if he accepts. Caleb's mouth opened. "Matthew," he said, both incredulous and wounded. "He answers my calls and doesn't try to move my furniture," Steven said without heat. Amber shifted in her chair. "This feels punitive," she said. "It feels like boundaries," Maria said, voice even, "which are sometimes confused with punishment by people who benefit from none." Finally, Steven said. He stood. His hip twinged. He let it. "We step out to the north lot. Bring your coats." They walked in a little train across the yard. The stars were crisp. The shed, no longer a shed, glowed warm through new windows. Inside, the small place smelled of pine and paint. A narrow bed fit into an alcove. The little kitchen had a proper vent hood. The front room could hold a chair, a table, and a man's thoughts. Caleb turned full circle, eyes wide despite himself. "You did all this?" he asked. "With help," Steven said. "Permits too." He tapped the frame where a paper hung in a sleeve. "Legal." Why, Amber asked, not quite hiding a sneer. "Because a man who learns to carry his own load might learn to stop pushing other folks," Steven said. He looked at his son. "I'm offering this house and this acre to you, Caleb." Caleb blinked, stunned. "To me?" "To you," Steven said. "On conditions. You don't borrow on it. You don't sell it for 5 years. You pay your own utilities. You plant that soil with what you want to eat. You fix what breaks. You come to supper here when invited, and you do one thing every week for someone who can't pay you back. If you walk, it reverts to the trust. If you stay, you might just grow up." Caleb's face flushed. Pride and shame warred. He looked past Steven at the field, dark and honest. "This is small," he said at last, hearing himself and wincing. "It's enough," Steven said. "That's something you haven't learned yet." Amber folded her arms tight. "We moved in to help you," she said. "You moved in to manage me," Steven said. "Those aren't the same." Silence fell deep as snow. Somewhere a coyote yipped. Earl sniffed and pretended it was the cold. Caleb swallowed. "Dad," he said, voice gone rough. "I looked the other day at the stairs. I said something I shouldn't have said. I was scared. He looked at his shoes, and angry. Not at you, at life, at money, at feeling like a failure at 32. Stephen's jaw worked. He let the quiet sit long enough to teach. You're not a failure, he said finally. You're a man who forgot how to be decent when things pinched. Decency under pressure is the only decency that counts. Caleb nodded quick and wet-eyed. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry for the soup. I'm sorry for the brochures. I'm sorry for talking about your field like he stopped. Like ground with no bones in it, Steven said softly. Apology accepted. Conditions stand. Amber let out a breath that steamed. Where does this leave me? She asked, chin up. With your husband, Steven said. In a small warm house where work and kindness are the rent? On the walk back, Maria fell in beside Steven. You sure? She murmured. I'm giving him exactly what he asked me for, Steven said. A place to sit. He'll find out it's easier to stand when it's his chair. Back in the kitchen, Steven wrote 4 things on the chalkboard. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Earl. Welcome, Dean. Caleb paints Saturday. He underlined the last one and set the brush on the counter. Can I? Caleb started. Can I move our stuff tonight? Steven shook his head. Tomorrow. Tonight you sleep, and tomorrow you pick a paint color you can live with when you're tired of it. For a moment, Caleb looked 12 again. He laughed small and true. Not gray, he said. Not gray, Steven agreed. Moving took 2 days and a dozen trips across the yard. They learned the measurement of enough by what would fit through the little door. The ring light didn't. Amber tried twice and then set it on the curb with a brittle smile. The recliner did barely. Steven watched from the porch, hip easy cane forgotten beside the steps. When the last box slid inside, Caleb stood in the doorway of the tiny place and breathed out like a man setting down a duffel. That first week, the pipes knocked, the heater hiccuped, and the front step wobbled. Caleb called no one. He watched a video on traps and crawled under the sink. He borrowed a level and shimmed the step with cedar shims Steven handed him like communion wafers. At night he sat at the small table with a notebook and sketched out a garden, 3 beds 4 by 8, a fence against rabbits, a trellis for tomatoes. It looked like something a boy would draw in math class. It looked right. Amber didn't love it. The clients in her office mentioned the downsizing, and she laughed it off, then didn't. She packed a suitcase one Thursday with quick motions and a mouth like a straight line. I'll be at my sister's this weekend, she told Caleb, not asking. She did not look toward the farmhouse. Okay, Caleb said, because a man learns a lot faster when his sentences get shorter. Saturday morning he walked across the yard at 8 sharp, carrying a 5-gallon bucket and a face that could stand rain. Steven was already in the barn, measuring boards with a pencil Ruth had once tucked behind his ear for a joke. He didn't turn right away. He let Caleb stand there long enough to remember his boots. I need paint, Caleb said, and a hand with the fence. Steven nodded at the bucket. Post hole diggers in the corner, he said. Paints at Darla's. Tell her you're my boy. She'll charge you full price on principle. They worked without much talk. The good kind of quiet, where the scrape of a hoe and the thunk of a post set in concrete make their own music. At noon, Steven ladled chili from a pot he'd started early and handed Caleb a bowl on the back steps. They ate with spoons, and the dog watched with that raised eyebrow dogs make when they think they're people. Dad, Caleb said at last, and the word didn't scrape. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the field. I don't know what got into me. Fear, Steven said, and laziness, the American twins. Caleb huffed a laugh and wiped his mouth. Amber might not. He stopped. You can live small 2 ways, Steven said. You can be mean, or you can be tidy. Only one of those makes room for other people. Caleb nodded. He looked across the yard at the farmhouse. Think I can earn back any of it? You can earn back your name, Steven said. The land's taken care of. The college kids came in March, hands soft and eager. Dean walked the fence lines with them and pointed out where cows teach a man about gates. Steven stood with Earl by the cottonwoods and watched 3 students argue happily about how to fix a sag. "I'll be damned," Earl said, voice thick. "You made a school out of a pasture." "I just wrote it down," Steven said. Maria made the lines straight. Amber came back after 2 weeks' suitcase apology and a face that had learned nothing and learned a little. She lasted a month in the small house. The heat clicking on at 2 a.m. reminded her of motel rooms. The way Caleb wiped his boots before coming in annoyed her. The way he went to help Earl fix a ramp at the post on a Friday night instead of streaming a preacher with glass railings offended her sense of priorities. She left quiet. Caleb watched her taillights go and didn't chase. That's a kind of growing up, too. Spring rolled over the pasture in green waves and May put clover at the fence. Steven did his PT, walked the rows with Caleb, learned to like arugula if it was cut young. He cooked on Sundays the old recipes Ruth left on index cards with stains for proof, and people came. Matthew made it up from Oklahoma with a pie his girlfriend had baked and a willingness to sign the trustee paperwork without looking like a man with a crown. "It's just a job," he said. "I'll do it right." On Memorial Day, the VFW set new flags. Steven stood in line with the others, hat in hand, and didn't feel like a museum piece. After the service, a woman who taught at the college brought 3 students over to meet him. One shook his hand too hard and said, "Thanks for letting us mess up your pasture before we learn to fix it." Steven laughed and said, "That's how learning works. You'll break things you can mend, and you'll mend things you didn't break." In June, a storm blew through with wind that leaned on the house like a drunk. The power clicked off, and the night went dark as a pocket. Caleb came across the yard with a flashlight and a toolbox without being asked. He and Steven started the generator, checked the stove, and then sat at the kitchen table with candles blinking and the dog snoring underfoot. "You ever think about," Caleb began, then stopped. "About what?" Steven asked. "About how fast a house can feel like a home again." "Speed depends on the work," Steven said, "not the calendar." Caleb nodded. "I'm looking at a job in town," he said. "Hardware store, part-time to start." Darla said, "I have good hands." "You do," Steven said. "They just forgot for a while." They listened to the rain drum the porch roof. Caleb cleared his throat. "Dad, if I keep going like this, will you ever trust me with more?" Steven stirred his coffee with a knife the way men who don't care about small rules do. "Trust isn't a deed," he said. "It's a daily. Show up for 100 small things and it adds up to one big one. Show up when it's boring. That's the test." Caleb smiled slow and real. "I can do boring," he said. "Good," Steven said. "Most of life is." By August, the garden threw more tomatoes than 2 men could eat. They set up a card table at the end of the drive with a coffee can for dollars and a sign that said "Honor System." People took cucumbers and left 5s. A widow from town left cookies with a note that said, "For the veteran and the boy who learned." On a Wednesday, Steven took the stairs without the cane and didn't think about it until he was at the bottom. He touched the banister anyway, gratitude a habit. He made soup, chicken, and noodles, the real kind Ruth used to roll. He ladled it into bowls and called across the yard. "Supper," he shouted, voice young. Caleb came at a trot, sweat dark on his cap, dirt on his hands like honest makeup. They sat. Steven slid a bowl across. "Careful," he said. "It's hot." Caleb held it steady. "I know," he said. He lifted the spoon and blew patient. After they stepped out to the porch, the sun went down slow, doing that Kansas magic trick where the whole sky learns one color and then another. The cottonwoods whispered. The dog sighed. Steven looked at his son and saw a man who had been lost at home and found in a small house with a straight fence. "I was cruel to you," Caleb said quietly, not looking away. "I was afraid. I'm still afraid sometimes. But when my hands are busy, I forget." "That's the trick," Steven said. "Busy with the right things." He stood and tested his hip. It held. He looked over the land, his and not his, times mostly, and felt that old radio phrase rise like a habit and a prayer. All clear, he said to Ruth, to the cottonwoods, to the boy who'd come back hungry and stayed to work. The farm didn't get bigger, it got better. Steven didn't get richer, he got right. He didn't send his son to hell. He handed him a small door and stood aside. Some men need a mansion to fail. Some need a one-room house to learn how to be good. And when the wind cut across the pasture in November and the first snow dusted the field that was not a graveyard, Steven poured 2 bowls of soup steady and sure and said, "Eat while it's hot."